My name is Faris Samairani.
Azim, please also up.
Okay.
More interactive, less.
Sure. Yeah, so this is the final, so please keep your cheering to a minimum.
So what is ClickUp? ClickUp is an all.
Without further ado, I invite Pia here.
The Look East policy provides you economic growth, stability, and stable actors to trade with. This feeds into the incentives of the Malaysian government, which is that you do not want to be fucked economically, you do not want to be sucked into a debt trap, and you want to grow your economy in the process. A few things to set up. Why is it that when you maintain neutrality, you will then inevitably gravitate to the largest economic force? Because in the point where you're still pursuing economic growth, in the end, you're still choosing for a trade partner. But we prove to you why is it that you will still gravitate to the largest economic force, in which we see the status quo. There is a clear trajectory of the dominant China hegemony in terms of the economic sphere. This looks like the setup of AIIB, in which they control large parts of Asia. This looks like your ports in Sri Lanka, in which there's encroachment of the smaller states. We think that this is where we push the burden onto the op, which is that if you cannot disprove that China is going to be the ultimate dominant force, I'll take on later. If you cannot prove that China is the ultimate dominant force, that Malaysia is ultimately going to pivot towards because of it being a global dominant hegemony, that means that you need to prove to us why is it that, number one, your neutrality is something that provides you a surplus benefit, because the point in time where we prove to you that the LEP is something that gives you a surplus benefit, we win this debate. But before I move on, sure, I'll take up your eye.
So basically, is government supporting that this Look East policy is predominantly just one belt, one road?
Sorry?
So it's basically government defending that this Look East policy will predominantly be controlled by only China and lesser of South Korea.
Wait, no, we're saying that in the absence of Look East policy, you are likely to then gravitate towards China. Yeah, but first, how does the Look East policy look like? We think Look East policy looks like trading with like your states of Japan and Korea. This looks like tech transfer. This looks like transferring like knowledge within industries that you're trading with. This looks like maybe sending your engineers over there, or just like having trade deals of like your exports and imports of your products. Now, why is it that this LOP is a good thing? We think that number one, there's already historical precedence that the adoption of LOP was good. We see that in instances of how Japan and Korea have helped us to build a lot of like our universities, and there was already historical precedence of ties. But also secondly, the important framing here is that Japan and Korea are stable economies. And this is good because when you want to trade with a foreign partner, you need them to be stable actors. I'm not taking it anymore. You need them to be stable actors. I'll prove the comparative as to why this stability is something that's a good thing. But before that, why is it that this is the only exclusive platform for you to pursue growth? Note that Japan, Korea, and Malaysia is the only alternative where you can provide a symbiotic relationship due to the nature of the investments, due to the nature of the trade deals that you're likely going to occur. Why is this so? Because Japan and Korea, they are predominantly active within the tech industry, meaning they have a lot of technology, they have a lot of knowledge in terms of like the Samsung and things like that. Whereas Malaysia is good in terms of that we have a lot of manufacturers, we have a lot of labor for these kinds of things. Meaning that when you come to a trade deals and you look into the Look East policy, this is when you can have exchange of benefits between your East Asian states and also Malaysia. This is important because at the end of the day, when you have both states that are benefiting as well, this is when you create a much more cohesive and lack of there's no idea of like an asymmetry of power, and none of these actors actors are going to then be economically dependent on each other. Why is this important? Because we think that this is when you compare to the alternative that's likely going to happen when you remain in status quo, which is the foreign policy of neutrality. Note, why is this going to happen? We think that the comparative here is going to be China, which is an actor that is threefold. Number one, you have a different sort of idea of what investments look like. Number two, China is predatory in nature. But also number three is that China is an inconsistent actor. But first, on the idea of what does the investment is, how it's going to differ. Note that this directly compares to the symbiotic relationship you are going to achieve with East Asian states. When you trade with China, when you have agreement deals with China, this is going to look like China forcing you to sign deals, forcing you to purchase China product. This looks like China having to sign deals with you to have like railways such as HSR, wanting their particular infrastructures to then be encroached within your smaller states. We don't think this is the interest of the Malaysian government because you do not want to be economically dependent on a foreign actor. But also number two, China as a predatory actor. Note that because of note that an example of this would then be the HSR, the monorail, in which where it is said that if you do not, in which that China then has the leverage to then have like years of lease that allows you to then be in debt to them, and if you don't pay them back, then that particular railway would then not be in use of Malaysia. We think that this is a particular justified trend analysis to then justify that China is a predatory actor. But also number two, we also see that China is also your inconsistent actor, in which we can see things like the manipulation of the RMB. We can see things like the reasons why a lot of the East Asian states in status quo don't even rely on China in the first place, because they already concede that China is not going to be good for their stable economies. The reason why Japan and Korea are particularly good actors as well is because on their own, they're already stable economies. They don't have to depend on China. Malaysia is different. We are still a small state. We still need to we still need to cooperate, trade deals with other countries. And in the event when you get to choose which actors that you want to offer, we think that this is when it's better for you to choose someone who is stable, who has more stability, and someone who can also give you a much more balanced playing field of trade deals as well, in comparison to China that is going to push you into getting to leech more of your resources out of you, right? We think that this means that if opposition cannot prove that the particular policy of neutrality as a surplus, we still win because of the extrinsic benefit that we still stand because of the symbiotic relationship that exists between Malaysia and also the East Asian states. Note that this still stands independently even if the panel doesn't buy the fact that China is going to be the global dominant force that Malaysia is going to gravitate towards. Meaning that at the end of the day, if you were to look east, Malaya wins. Thank you.
Thanks, PM, for that fine speech. So, in the case of I invite our kid here.
Phone siapa ni? Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, diam ya. Can lah. Okay lah. I find the Gulf case very weird. The Gulf case is essentially saying, if Malaysia was neutral, it means Malaysia will gravitate and look towards China at the expense of trading with West, at the expense of trading with Japan, at the expense of trading with Korea. We reject this and we don't think it's true. And what they're saying essentially is that all the benefits of trade with Japan and Korea and all the harms of trading with China, I think only accrue at the point in which they successfully prove to you that in neutrality, Malaysia will look towards China. We reject this for a few reasons. The first thing is that if you look at the info slide, looking east means looking at East Asia. And the last time I checked, at the last NEADC, and East Asia includes China. Yes, right? And under this, I want to talk about how looking east in 80s did not include China because of the situation of China at the specific time, right? In readopting looking east today, you need to look at how China is now, and that means looking east, it will inevitably means looking at China in addition to Japan and Korea. Second thing is, when you readopt it, it means that you need to have an explicit public policy, right? Because you need to tell people operating in Malaysian businesses what you're going to do in the near future, right? Number one, it means it limits the ability for you to look outside of East Asia and China, right? Because at the cost of you looking contradictory to your own policy, right? And you must sound consistent in order for people to know what to act. But secondly, other actors, especially your West, especially your other trading partners, will know what to do, what you are doing and what you're choosing, and they will react accordingly in terms of how they're trading with you, right? And so the comparative here is this, right? Under neutrality, because you're not tied to anyone and you have not announced your intention to be tied to anyone, it means number one, you have the ability and you have the capacity to make choices that work the best for you in whatever situation you're in what kind of trades that you're doing. Because trading with West is beneficial in some parts and trading with the East is beneficial in some parts. It's not the same kind of trade. But the second thing, it also means there's an incentive for you in the absence of a known policy that you will choose the best kind of trading partner and not just China, because you just announced to the whole world that you are looking east. That's that. I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to talk about what the status quo looks like, what is the interest of the Malaysian government. I'm going to talk about adoption. I'm going to talk about why it's not necessary. I'm going to talk about why it's counterproductive and harmful. Let's first talk about the status quo. We think Malaysia is like this, right? We think number one, no other countries in Southeast Asia explicitly adopting looking east. There's no necessity for Malaysia to do the same. Secondly, we think Malaysia's largest trading partner is already China. I'm not sure what difference does it make and why we need to further look to China and East Asia. The third thing is the other trading partners that we have that top the list are Singapore, EU, USA, and the rest of the Southeast Asian region. And in looking east, we need to look at how it affects trade with these people. And the next thing to talk about here is that neutrality has worked in Malaysia, right? We've shown that we have been trading well with both sides of the divide. We've been trading well with Singapore and the rest of Southeast Asia. I'm not sure why we need to change that. The last thing here is we get choice from access, right? Means we are able to choose trading blocks that work best and give us the best advantage depending on the situation and depending on what we are trading. Next, let's look at interest of the Malaysian government. We think there are three main things we want to talk about, right? Number one is trading and economics. Number two is geopolitical stability. And number three is the well-being of the people. And we think the three things will determine why we should do this why we should not do this debate. But let's also look at adoption, right? Why does adoption of looking east mean? Number one, it is a significant shift in terms of your policy from neutrality. Now you're looking explicit to one side. This means two things. Number one, you need to publicly announce your intent, right? It needs to be explicit stance, right? And this means two things. A, their trading partners in the West will know your preferences, right? And will move to other partners, right? And will also shift in terms of their trading strategies with you. They're unlikely to offer you competitive terms. They're unlikely to offer you competitive rates. Because if I know whatever it is I'm offering you, you're going to look east. Why? Why would I offer you the best rates? Why would I try to compete in China in that way? But secondly, in terms of East Asian countries, especially China, they also know your intentions, right? That means number one, they have no incentive to offer you the best competitive rates, right? Because they know either way, you will choose them, right? It's either China, Japan, Korea, one of them, right? So you get less favorable terms as opposed to a world in which you're trading with all of them. Second thing here then, is it necessary? Why have we previously looked east? In the 80s and 90s, East Asian countries in Korea and Japan were on a bull run. Now, the South Korea and Japan are kind of stagnating, right? And if you look at China, they're experiencing the effects of having grown too rapidly, right? Look at Evergrande, look at the collapse of multiple developers in China, right? The second thing then is about how a lot of these things, they lack transparency. Look at how Jack Ma has disappeared. Look at how a lot of states are controlling chaebols and whatever not in Korea and China, right? So while these harms exist right now as a result of trading with China and East Asia, they exist a lot more significantly once you are looking east, right? In the current state of the economy, there's no necessity for you to do this right now. Point.
Why is international relations and forming relationships something that's zero sum? Like Japan and Korea are Western allies. The West won't drop you.
Yes, but if you look east, and predominantly you look at China, then you are taking sides. And taking sides when you are not needed to take sides, I'm not sure why. Right? Next, let's look at transparency and corruption here, right? Because if you look at 80s, you have the scandal of Karen Group and Bhumiputra Bank, and all these are caused by having weaker institutions in the versus what you have in the West, right? And we think a lot of these problems still remain today, right? And exclusivity that comes from making a choice makes it a lot easier. Let's look at why it's counterproductive and harmful. In terms of economic trade, 4 things. Number 1, you have to trade off trade with the West. You make explicit choice to the East, and that's the choice, right? There's no reason for you to offer competitive rates. Second is your ability to trade in variety of currencies depending on situation and partners, right? The third is the ability to make strategic trade decisions depending on which block is ahead, which one is more competitive. But 4 is the ability for you to export to different countries, right? Especially in terms of different requirements, in terms of like how compliant are you with RSPO or whatever. If you cannot sell to US and West, you sell to China lah. You don't have to make the choice there, right? The second thing in terms of geopolitics, right? You need to know that Malaysia is in a very precarious situation in terms of Chinese influence, right? Especially what's going on with South China Sea, right? And what this means is, number 1, if you're explicitly choosing China and East Asia, that means you are risking your relationship with Singapore and a lot of other Southeast Asian states, with which your trade suffer, your relations suffer with these important closest allies. But secondly, your explicit choice for you to look east means there's less incentive and less ability for the West or the US to offer counteracting force against whatever threat that China is acting against you. But also thirdly, and more intuitively, right, if you're actively choosing East and actively choosing China, it means you need to concede and you need to make a lot of concessions in order for these partnerships to work. And there's a lot of expectation for you to make these concessions versus a world in which you're neutral and you're free to make your own choice. Oppose.
Thanks, Alo, for that fine speech. We'll continue the case for Gov and by DPM. Clear.
Alright, can you hear me? Okay, cool. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I swear this team has a problem with like characterization debates, right? Because they tell you that, oh, East Asia includes China. Then we'll tell you that the readoption of this policy will look like the same policy in the past, which excludes China, which includes Korea and Japan. I don't get this definition battle. I don't think it should be credited as a push. Whatever they've done so far has been unnecessary. A few pushbacks, I think this is immediately important. It ties into the lack of response to Ernst's case, right? Because simply put, Wesley says, neutrality means that we will just be in limbo, technically. We won't announce who we're trading with, we'll just trade whenever we choose is correct. The problem with this is, and I think it was pushed early from Ernst, is that there's always a need for economic growth. Malaysia is a growing population. You need to find an economic powerhouse to latch onto and grow. If you don't have that, essentially what OP has is a stagnation. This means they want people to lose jobs, they want people to slowly decline and immediately die off. That's not in the interest of the Malaysian government, I'm pretty sure. Secondly then, right, is to understand why the look east policy and this crazy zero sum they wanted to push to us was that the moment you look east, the West will drop you by virtue of, as Wesley says, announcement. Because you announce you want to trade with Korea and Japan, now the West say, no, we don't want to be friends with you anymore. Because Korea and Japan, man, we thought we were your best friends. Which unfortunately is not how international relations work. Like you don't drop relationships because you form new relationships, right? You just make bigger friends. But secondly, this also means that the examples that they wanted to push, like Southeast Asia will start dropping you, Vietnam will drop you because you announce Korea as your best friend. Like, no bro, you will still trade with Vietnam, you will still trade with your Southeast Asian partners by virtue of proximity. Is it completely dumb for you to stop trading and cut off supply chains because you want to look east. But secondly, I think it's about strategy, because IR debates are about two things, which is actor interest and strategy. So it's about actor interest. I think Gulf has sufficiently proven to you what is the actor interest when it comes to Malaysian growth, when it comes to the best actor, right? But secondly, it's about strategy, because it's important. Ursi already posited to you, and if this debate has to be on some level of like middle ground, there needs to be a zero sum to an extent. The zero sum here is simple. The economic powerhouse that you will gravitate to would be China. Notice that they have not responded to this argumentation at all. The response was China is East Asia. Like what? It's not a response, right? You can't credit that as a response. Be charitable. But secondly, here, what does this then mean, right? This means when you're forced to gravitate towards the biggest economic powerhouse, and it's correct that Wesley points out, we already have the biggest trading partner as China. Isn't that exactly why it's high time to start shifting? Isn't that exactly high time to show that economic dependency on a bad faith actor is eventually going to lead us into demise? The only way in which we can revert that is when we have that. I'll talk about security in a bit, but before that, go.
So Japan has been experiencing suppressed GDP growth for the past 20 years because of also partly because of their underpopulation and people are not having children. Korea being the same. Where is the global economic superpower in Far
Okay, cool. Here's what I add on to that. Notice that Japan and Korea as a combined economy are proposed as economies which can challenge China. This is the reason why Wesley's speech about explaining the manipulation of the RMB and also the housing crisis that happens in China is very apparent symptoms of China economy declining. This means you need to challenge that. But secondly, this also means when in times of crisis and you look towards your partners, you can form a meaningful relationship that mutually benefits both partners. It's high time that Malaysia, which has high labor, can send our engineers over to like Japan and Korea, and Japan and Korea can also send their expertise over to Malaysia. Clear within NC's speech, no response means it still stands throughout the end of the debate. Secondly, then, what does this then look like when it comes to the interest of Malaysia, especially, right? If it's true that Japan is declining in growth rates, this means that we have the premium position to angle ourselves as the prime friend of Japan and China. But this leads to my second extension, which is really important, which is about security. Because notice in the tail end of Wesley's speech, it says security. It says China bad encroaching South China Sea. Correct. That is why we need to start fostering relationships with the allies that potentially help you, because Japan and Korea are part of the Quad, right? This means that they have high powers in protecting you. The only way in which you can foster relationships are when you firstly start off slow by like economic relationships. We re-foster these strong ties and bolster these relationships. But secondly, this also leads to some form of like economic symbiosis. This means that the encroachment of China into the South China Sea, by the way, noting that this is Malaysia's biggest security problem, means it's still in the interest of Malaysia, becomes reduced. Because now, not only do you have stronger allies in that side, where Korea and Japan will be more likely to side with you, especially alongside the Quad, right? This means that you're able to protect your seas better. Of course, we agree that there's a time lag to this policy. It cannot happen tomorrow or next year. The problem here then is equally on or they aren't able to enact anything. But let's do the meta in my final last comparative, right? Because I need to call this out immediately. Because notice that at the end of LO, there isn't any positive material, right? At best, it's been negative to firefight a large chunk of the positive material coming out from Gulf. At best, they say, we want to be neutral, we don't want to do anything. I don't think this is enough. I think there needs to be a burden to prove either A, what is the alternative to this economic powerhouse insofar as we need growth, but B, if it's true that there is some level of like surplus within a Gulf, that means that we can attain that surplus. Hope hasn't proved to us how do you either match this surplus or why this surplus is necessarily bad. I'm basically helping them to set their direction moving forward. At this point, the comparative is simple. At this point, the surplus is something we want. At this point, the surplus looks extremely beneficial for both sides when it comes to the economic aspect, when it comes to the security aspect. But lastly, why then whatever, and if they propose China now, now, right, is still a problem because there are four major problems to this, right? Let's talk about internally, the manipulation of the RMB and also the critical housing crisis. I think this is already bad China bad. But number two, we talk about debt trap diplomacy and how China operates in investment. We think China is a very, very bad actor. Unless they can provide to us an alternate, I don't know how we win this. For that, Malaya.
Thank you, EPM, for that fine speech. To continue the piece of op, I invite ELO.
Someone's phone.
Guys, the phone is recording.
Oh, oops. Sorry, Boomer. I apologize beforehand for screaming. Speech in 3, 2, 1. I agree with government that there's economic symbiosis here. The last time I checked, parasitism is also a form of symbiosis. And I think that's what's going to happen because we're going to get our economy parasited by South Korea and Japan. So I'm just going to give you positive material because thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for telling us that what we need to do in the debate when we have a team that tells us that Japan and South Korea combined has an economy that can rival China. Okay, this team wants to discuss on the debate. Thank you very much. So I'm going to have 3 positive material for you today. Number 1, why exclusivity with three of these countries are bad, and I'm going to tell you why, even if we don't agree that China is part of it, which we are going to tell you why you put yourself in a trajectory to work with them. All three countries have unique problems that are naturally bad for the Malaysian economy. Secondly, I'll talk about geopolitical stability since I want to talk about IR so much. But lastly, I'm going to tell you why the nature of our export economy does not only jive with exporting exclusively to Japan and South Korea, and why we need to diversify our economy. But before that, 3 points of refutation. So note at this point, government's case relies on us naturally drifting towards China and working exclusively with China in order for their harms to materialize. Insofar as I can prove to you why A, that's not the truth, and B, why they themselves are going to put more likely on the track to work with China, they lose this clash lump sum. 5 reasons why. The first is that in status quo, it's simply not true that we only work exclusively with China when we have neutrality. We work with everyone that's favorable for us, meaning that, for example, depending on the type of trade that we have, we export to China when favorable, we export to EU when favorable, we export to the US when favorable. Diversity is on our side. Secondly, the burden is not on opposition to prove why this is true. It's on government. That's the basis of debating. If you're accusing us of leading to a natural outcome, you have to prove that, not opposition. The third is that, let's tell you why they are likely to put you in the face of China. Because inevitably, when you trade with Japan and South Korea, there's a city that you need to stop at, correct? Because you're going to predominantly export in their semiconductor and machinery, which means that these are heavy-ass items that at some point you have to make a refueling trip, or you have to make a shipping trip, or you need storage hubs. Which country is in between Malaysia and Japan and South Korea? My geography is not very good, but the last time I checked, is China. So meaning that in your world, that you rely heavily on South Korea and Japan, you are likely to put us in the trajectory to work with China. In our world, we don't really have to go towards South China Sea, we can go towards anywhere. The fifth reason is a cop-out, because they say that, in their world, they can still trade with everyone. They don't need to debate law, because in your world, you can look east, look west, look everywhere. No, your job is to defend predominantly why, even when there are deals that are slightly favorable from the west, because of your policy, you still have to choose your main official trading partners, i.e. Japan and South Korea. That is the trade-off that you have to take, and we don't think you can come out for that. Second reason as to why they really lost this debate. Now, they want you to believe that, but if we trade with South Korea and Japan, we won't sour our relationship because South Korea and Japan are allies in the West. Yes, because they are diplomatic allies, but when it comes to economic competitors, they are still competitors, guys, because the South Korea and Japan are also looking for the same things as what US is, meaning that as a market that is also technology-based, as a market that is also semiconductor and services-based, they also look for cheap goods from exporting countries, which means that any export towards China and South Korea, towards Japan and South Korea, is an export that's not going to the USA. So which means that in a world where you announce publicly that you're going to trade exclusively with Japan and South Korea, you are going to incur the wrath of the West because you are now preferring one party over the other. Government is conflating politics and economy, and I'm going to tell you further with that. Because they tell you that, in status quo, China is going to cripple people with OBOR, infrastructural trade deals. We agree. But that is not what the burden is on opposition. Because if you look at the nature, those are sovereign funding from PRC, from China. It is not B2B trading. In our world, we say that B2B trading is a world where you don't over-rely on unnecessary infrastructural deals that means you have to work with China in order to build ports, airports,
and other things that we don't need. True, the ERL is one of them, but other than that, other traits that we have constantly worked with China is not dependent on taking sovereign debt from them, and therefore is not susceptible towards corporate control from China. So I don't want you to conflate politics and economy any further. Now, moving on to my arguments, but before that, I'll take one argument from there.
The Iskandaria in Johor is a social investment. Why do you only see implications out?
Hey, Gus, you cannot give me an example. We actually give you proper analysis. Can you please do that or not? So we are going to give you one first argument on what exclusivity of trade with these three countries are uniquely bad. So I just want to tell you that these three countries, let's start with China first, because even if it is not China, we still win on the two latter ones. So China specifically has a tendency to use predatory means in order to control. We agree with government, which means that in a world where government is right in all of their harms to prove that what China is bad, then a world where we are likely to work with China is the one that's going to result in materialization of this harm, which is government's work, and I think that deals with their problem. Secondly, South Korea is predominantly controlled by chaebols, and therefore, a lot of the times the economy is contingent upon what enriches the families in South Korea the most, which means that in events that you have a trade deal with them, they are still likely going to prioritize what is better for themselves at the risk of going through, screwing over diplomatic ties between Malaysia and South Korea, because ultimately it's all about making sure the Lee family is still standing. But lastly, when it comes to Japan, bro, there's a reason why the first Look East policy failed in the 90s, because at that point, Japan and South Korea were already stagnating, guys. So if you look at the current world, they have to at least prove to you why. Sure, they are stable economy, but why are things getting better? We agree that is stable, is stably going downwards. Because Japan, other than Malaysia, is the country in Asia with the weakest currency, weakest spending, weakest population, weakest labor force. So on all these accounts, Japan is not a favorable trade partner for us. On top of that, you are looking east, so you have to emulate their work culture as well. Bro, Japan and South Korea have the worst working culture in the world. You have 996, you have Japan where they favor you sleeping at work because they're tired, and eventually Japan, Korea, the most cutthroat and Game of Thrones corporate culture in the world, where it has the highest KMS rate per capita in the world, and that's the workforce that you want to adopt. Lastly, let's talk about why it's beneficial for Malaysian economy, and this is where government is super underwhelming. When it comes to our export, we are not just solely relying on semiconductors. We agree with that. But on that front, we are also losing out because we're the fourth biggest exporter, no longer the first. Which means that we also have to diversify our economy in terms of using things like your oil and gas, your natural ores, your shipping infrastructure, your services industry. All of which meant that we agree that some of it is better off giving it to Japan and South Korea. But you can't expect every single one of these things to be given to Japan and Korea, because we are now looking at giving them an oversupply of materials which they don't need, and because of the low demand there, you are going to work with unfavorable deals, which means that it's better to therefore diversify your economy and give things towards the houses or the countries that need it the most. We think that diversification comes better on our side because we are not bound by a public knowledge policy that says that you have to only give things to this world. So we think that in every single account of those things, we agree China might be bad for us, but we also agree that in our world, we are less likely to work with China because we can work with other people. If it is indeed true that Japan and South Korea is good, we already work with them status quo. We don't need to exclusively work with them. Proud to post.
Thanks, Yellow, for that fine speech. To conclude the Gov case, I invite Gov to the hearing.
Give me 1 second. I've engaged in bad faith debating before, so I know exactly what it looks like coming from the side of opposition, right? The notion in which readoption happens at the point of the Look East policy requires us to delve into what the point of the Look East policy was to begin with. Insofar as opposition themselves pointed out that the Look East policy never included China to begin with, I'm unsure as to why a readoption of a policy which we tried suddenly has to include a new actor. And there's something clear that came out immediately from UNSI. The fact that the Look East policy does not include China, because at the point in which they readopted it to begin with, they weren't a part of the Look East policy. So I'm unclear as to why, in the spirit of the motion readoption of what the Look East policy was at the point of the Asian financial crisis, has to include an actor which was never part of Malaysian public policy to begin with, or international policy to begin with. Then note the attempt of burden pushing on the times of opposition. Note that this isn't on us to prove why the readoption then does not exclude China. You have to prove why it does include China. And there's a lot of counter assertions as to why this is, but I'll go into it later on. So why does this readoption policy doesn't mean China, right? I think multiple layers sit. One, readoption means the policy at that time, so it's likely to default to Japan and South Korea as it was at the time of the financial crisis. Number two, it is unlikely because these Asian countries are diametrically opposed. So even if you want to talk about China as a potential ally within East Asia, the fact that you have to pick between China or Japan and South Korea means you're likely to gravitate towards Japan and South Korea, who have the same level of incentive as the Malaysian government in terms of trade, in terms of symbiotic relations. And number three, the relations between these Eastern countries are polarized anyways. So Malaysia doesn't want to antagonize the West, which means they're going to trade with Japan and South Korea. I'm unclear this weird characterization that comes from off. At the point in which we trade with Japan and South Korea, we are unlikely to get favorable deals from the West because now the West hates us, as if the West doesn't trade with Japan and South Korea themselves. I am unclear as to why this is a thing that the West is suddenly able to do. At the point in which we trade with the allies that are more proximate to them, rather than Southeast Asian countries, no, I'm unclear as to why the West is suddenly going to be antagonized. Number four, they want to argue that you need a country as a stop in between from Malaysia and all of that. Yeah, it's Taiwan. That's not China. And five, how it's failed. I think necessarily they tried to push in the last part of Patrick's speech that necessarily the Far East policy has failed at the time. I'm unclear why this is true. Insofar as Malaysia has multiple technological manufacturing areas, at the point in which Malaysia has multiple universities built for expats in Japan and South Korea, is the reason why the Far East policy was effective at the time. Yes, we may concede that it wasn't the most effective economic policy at shaping and reshaping the Malaysian economy, but it was effective in a way that mattered at that time and will matter currently. I think the way here for this is simple, right? Even if Look East may include China, the very policy will be excluding of China because of, even though the East may include China, the very policy excludes them because of the incentives of governments, the incentive of the Malaysian state, and the policy itself. And I want to flag out very quickly before I get into exchange responses and then my thing. And flag out the counter assertion. They can't just counter assert that it's not going to be China, guys, because we have multiple choices. So I got killed in the last round for feedback about why we were counter asserting things. I think this is a clear example as to why opposition is counter asserting that it just isn't China. We provide you multiple structural reasons at the point in which neutrality, where you first exist in this limbo of trading with everyone, why there is gravitational push, like gravity literally, towards the biggest actor in the region, towards China. Given there was no structural response to this, and the only counter was that, oh, it can't be about China because the East includes China. This isn't actual response, this is counter assertion. And given this, I don't think saying choice is a sufficient mechanism in order to do this. I'll take you in a bit, please sit. Two exchange responses before I get there. Let's talk about this issue of choice and so why we can't trade with the West and why we should look East. Note that the Look East policy is a policy about prioritization. Insofar as the fact that a Western country comes to us with a policy that doesn't diametrically oppose our trade deals with the East, I am unclear why we're not going to take this. The debate then occurs at a point in which we have to choose between a good trade deal between Japan and Korea and a good trade deal with Germany, but we're likely going to choose Japan and Korea because of proximity, because of the ability to have this symbiotic relationship. I'm unclear as to why trade is a zero-sum game. But number two, on working culture, I think this is a very just last-minute jab coming from Patrick. Oh, the worst working culture in the world. True, and the motion does say we adopt some parts of the culture, but I'm pretty sure we can pick and choose what parts of the culture we want to adopt. I'm unclear why culture is adopted as a whole or none at all. I'm sure that the benefit of hindsight in terms of what culture is valuable, what culture isn't. The fact that we're talking about the fact that it's a very harmful culture means that there's predication for us to pick and choose what parts we want. Therefore, while trade deals of East Asia are infinitely better than the alternatives, be it China or be it charitably anything else. 4 reasons. Number one, on symbiosis and symmetry. Why necessarily this asymmetry of power when it comes to any other actor is far better on our side when it comes to Japan and Korea because of vested interests within manufacturing, within labor. The very reasons they want to bring up about the stagnation of Japan and Korea economy is the very reasons why these deals will be good, because the Japan and Korea realize the stagnation of the economy, realize they need a trade partner to do so, which means closer symmetry on weight allows more give and take at the point in which we have closer symbiotic, at the point in which Japan and and Korea need us as much as we need them. We think therefore the Look East policy is immensely successful at a point in symbiosis. If I move on, West.
So, under your point, gravitation requires China to be the most optimal trading partner in all situations. We've proven why that's not the case. Can you prove your counter assertion?
Okay, there's multiple reasons beyond just the most dominant superpower in the area. It looks at multiple current investments that China is doing within Malaysia. It looks at multiple other investments China is doing in Southeast Asia that all came from NC's speech. So you can't just say that it's not just the most efficient. You also have to deal with all these other things that NC said, which was undealt with. So I don't think it's relevant if Kelvin wants to come out and try this. But let's talk about three other things. Number two, the nature of the partner. And it's simply about the non-predatory nature of Japan and South Korea, why they're simply going to have strategic competitive deals. The way here is simple. China or any other alternative needs to be proven to have better nature and better vested interests than Japan and South Korea within our manufacturing industry in order to prove that they are better nature in deals. Insofar as we can prove the fact that we are better able to allow for the vested interest to occur, which means they will be good natured and better and even better economically competitive with us, as the point in which we think these Far East policies are going to work. Third, on the stability of actor. And I'm just going to prove the comparative here. While we maybe agree that Japan and Korea are not the most stable in the global society, I think the comparative with other Southeast Asian countries and with China, the comparative is far better. So maybe they're stagnating, at least they are declining like China. The point in which we have these vested interests and have these deals, at the point in which the stagnation no longer becomes a problem because the Look East is mutually beneficial on both sides. Finally, on weighing of security, I think necessarily Japan and South Korea are the stepping stones. In order to have economic development within these countries, we have stepping stones towards wider Malaysian involvement in terms of our biggest security issue, which is the 9-point line within the South China Sea. I think this exclusively happens on the side of government, so proud to propose.
Thanks, Kelvin, for that fine speech. We'll do this second portion of with.
Everything slides off. Excellent. I think the weird economic nostalgia that the government is facing this debate is this belief that what worked for us 20 years ago will work for us again because it was really good 20 years ago. Malaysia's Look East policy wasn't some genius brainchild creation by Mahathir Mohamad. Everyone was kind of looking east already. We just decided to label it a Look East policy. The reason why everyone was looking east at that point in time was because the Far East economies were roaring like economies, right? They were growing at rapid rates, experiencing rapid economic growth that other countries were. So you just kind of moved your investments a little bit to the east. And so that is not true anymore. There are other countries in the west, somewhere in the south, maybe in the north, that are already experiencing rapid economic growth as well. And so you shift your investment policy. Because if you are entrusted with the people's money, taxpayers' money, you diversify your investments and not risk and hedge your bets all in one country. What is this debate about? This is the fourth time I've had to have this issue as my first issue in my whip speech, because we're not sure where the East is, right? So, yes, the motion says i.e. Japan and Korea, but it doesn't stop there when we say look East. Obviously, look East includes China, because they are in the East, right? Also, yes, maybe previously when we looked East, our emphasis was on Japan and Korea, but that doesn't mean we didn't have any investments, extra investments in China. Just strategic to have more in Japan and Korea, right? And I don't know why they don't want to defend China. It's so much more advantageous for the government in this debate to also support investing in China as opposed to making China the evil actor here. The next thing we have to challenge in this issue is their premise correct? Which is that if we don't invest in Japan and Korea, we will invest all our money in China. That is just incorrect because we have the option of investing in multiple places. Obviously, most of the time we will gravitate to large nations because they can offer the security over our money because they can, tax more in the event that they experience some kind of default or some kind of depression or recession in their economies, right? And that's just proper risk management. And that's why we would look at those countries. So this debate is not about looking at the Far East, it's about looking at the East. And if they want to cop out from that, as they often do, that's up to them. Number two, but in any case, and I think Patrick makes a very good analysis here about who ends up with more over-dependence on China in the event that is their harm, right? Because in a world where you redirect trade and investment along and across the South China Sea, it becomes logistically more cost-effective to increase trade with China as well. Because as opposed to traveling to various parts of the world, given that you already have so much money invested in one trade route, you will just increase. And that's true for our businesses, right? If it's not just the government, our private businesses, our GLCs will likely make that strategic decisions. And this is something that they had no response to. And I think that's why you have more trade and investment with China on your side. Anyways, even if you redirect trade and investment from China to Japan and Korea, like, over-dependence on Japan and Korea is worse, bro. Why would you want to over-depend on them for, like, just two countries in order for you to experience growth with two countries that are not experiencing growth, right? And they say, no, our response is we will stop in Taiwan instead. Bro, what are you going to buy from Taiwan? What? The durians are in China, the minerals are in China, the food is in China. Like, there's limited stuff you can get from Taiwan, bro. And Taiwan is already surrounded by China. So you trade with Taiwan, China is going to screw you over. So I think the diversity of manufacturing products is in China. So again, our argument still applies in that regard. So why do we say that over-dependence on Japan and Korea is worse? Because Japan and Korea is not a global economic superpower as much as they want to say it is. I can also say Guyana is a global economic superpower. That doesn't make it true, guys. You actually have to give me analysis as to why they're experiencing growth at any point in time. We have to give you analysis that they're declining powers, largely because they're experiencing decelerating population growth, population decline in fact. Like women in South Korea are refusing to have children as part of their feminist movement, right? So Korea has a population problem, Japan has a population problem. More and more investment is being redirected away. Japan had negative interest rates for 17 years because of this very same issue. Their response is, but this is mutually beneficial. If we trade with them, we will save them. Us. We who have nothing going on for us will save Japan and Korea with our massively innovative technological products and very competitive advantageous products, right? Absolutely not true. Japan and Korea is not a dominant global economic superpower. We just beg this question, right? If their objective in this debate genuinely is we want to reduce over-dependence on China, why not look west? There's no reason, just look west up. Why not, right? There's no exclusivity to looking east. You can look anywhere and just pick two countries that are actually global economic superpowers and trade with them instead. So really, the benefit, I don't see it. Number two, our strategic advantage. So now we've given you many different arguments as to why we are likely to have you are likely to experience more harm as a result of looking east and identifying two particular countries to trade with. We told you are likely to be subject to less favorable terms because they know it's your policy to trade with them. They'll just say, yeah, you're going to trade with us anyways, here's my terms, it's unfavorable, too bad for you. Number two, you have to depend on currencies. You can't diversify your currency hedging, right? And that's going to make it worse. That's going to make your economic bets more risky. You don't have you can't choose strategic trade, things to strategically trade on. This is a very important argument, right? We said, for example, if AI is developing both in China and the US, or in Japan and Korea and the US, and you say, I'm going to choose Japan and Korea instead, and you have to make trade-offs in this debate, by the way, you can't just say no trade-offs. Then you are going to lose out on that strategic point of trading with the US on AI, right? And I think that's particularly bad. We also told you about the harms of work culture. So their response to this is, but you know, if we had to choose between trading with Germany and Japan and Korea, we pick Japan and Korea because it's proximate. Bro, that's already a cost-benefit analysis we make right now. That's not a new thing. That's status quo. Because if it's more proximate and cost-effective for trade with Japan and Korea, we'll do that. That's a cost-benefit analysis everyone makes, right? So they're not willing to make any trade-off with this debate because you don't know what are you losing out on and Gulf from the end of all their speeches. Lastly, on our point about toxic work culture, they say we can pick and choose which parts of culture we want to adopt. Suddenly we can pick and choose which one we want. But the thing is, the fundamental fact is Japan and Korea have very, very strong values of hard work. If this motion asks you to emulate that strong values of hard work, it has to come with the negative consequences of that extremely hard work. And that is all the harms that Patrick pointed out to you. We are very, very happy to oppose.
Thanks a lot for that fine speech and by opt reply. Here.
Panel, 3 reasons why we want this debate. Number 1, what does Malaysia need? Number 2, which country puts you more on the trajectory to work with China? And 3, other auxiliary concerns. Before that, let's just analyze meta level why government already lost from a framing point of view. The first is that fundamentally their case relies on 2 points that they need to prove. A, that in the absence of look east policy and with neutrality, Malaysia will gravitate towards working exclusively with China. They provided a reason and intuition pump for this, which is that it is the biggest market. And we say yes, in status quo, neutrality means you work with the biggest market in any single industry and export, which sometimes can be China, sometimes cannot be China. Which means that that is the world that we're willing to defend, because in status quo, like what everyone in opposition has told you, you have cost-benefit analysis when it comes to who you work with. But secondly, that they have a underlying assumption as well, that you have to work with South Korea and Japan, and they are fundamentally better than other economies, because that means that there's a reason, an exclusive benefit to why trading with them is good. Insofar as proven to you why the roaring 80s are behind us, and we are dealing with 2 countries which are A, nepotistic, 2, have weak currencies, and 3, have low purchasing power, and 4, have low population, I don't really see what is the unique benefit that these 2 countries offer to us. And in a point where we have to trade exclusively with them without sounding like hypocrites against our own policy, I think they lost this debate. But 2 other fatal assumptions they make. Number 1, they talk about why these countries need semiconductors from us, as if Malaysia only export in semiconductors. So worst case, even if we lose the clash on semiconductors, which we didn't, they still lose on every other export that we have, which we have illustrated to you throughout our speeches. Secondly, they conflate OBOR with Chinese investment. We agree that it is part of Chinese investment, but the bulk of what Wesley claimed in third, that we trade with China, are all B2B activities. B2B stands for business to business, which means that we have a lot of trade deals when it comes to real estate, when it comes to investment, when it comes to banking, that we work with those countries. Insofar as the harms are only accrued by infrastructure, we still win on the other fronts. Let's move on to clashes on why we win. Number 1, what does Malaysia need? We need diverse buyers, because in a world where we think that there are many things that Malaysia deals with, we think that it's strategic for us to not pack our economy towards 2 countries that A, might not fundamentally be the best when it comes to all sorts of imports that they want from us, but 2, sometimes have currencies that we think, the FX is not really doing well that time, perhaps we should sell it to another country, for example like USD, where we actually earn more from their strong currency. So because of that, the hedging is something that government has to defend, because they are saying that in most circumstances, by right they have to defend all, but let's be charitable. In most circumstances, Japan and South Korea are the best trading partner, which is not the case. So we think that in the interest of Malaysia, we want favorable deals monetarily, not friendship and diplomatic ties. Those things, we are already allies with Japan and South Korea. So I don't know how much more buddy you're going to be with these people. So by this means, Malaysia needs more money, and more money comes from us. Secondly, which country puts you more on China's path? This is to their own detriment, because their case says if you work with China, you lose. We told you why you are more likely to work with China on government. with proper reasons. A, because now you're trading with Japan and South Korea, inevitably there will be some storage, shipping, or assembly that you need to form in places like Hong Kong, Shenzhen, or Zhuhai, which are all places that you stop in your natural route towards Japan and South Korea. But secondly, if you want to talk about Taiwan as an alternative, in fact check, Taiwan is surrounded by Chinese warships, so I don't know how you're actually going to get a better idea there. But in our world, we don't have to defend that, because we say that in some instances it's better to trade with China, in some instances it's better to trade with the West. But thirdly, all our auxiliary concerns that were brushed aside by them, geopolitical concerns, because all these three countries are at each other's throat, and therefore there are real issues whereby the trade route can be blocked. Secondly, on work culture that is toxic, and thirdly, on the fact that you have an economy that is constantly stagnating with no signs of improvement. By any count, we win this debate.
So initially in prep, I believe that there was a winning case lined up, which my team let me run. I seriously believe that K-pop and anime was the answer. But I don't know, like, I guess if you lose then you can blame. But anyway, a few things I want to talk about within reply. I want to firstly talk about what the important burdens and problems that were immediately posited by government, not responsible at all, because they chose to do semantics, they chose to say East Asia, East China, fine, whatever. Number two, the lack of response to this symbiosis that we talk about, right? I.e., what is beneficial? Like, you make bets and you invest in companies when they're low, you don't buy them when they're high. This is something that's important, choose properly. Three, the neutrality and what actually neutrality looks like, because their characterization of neutrality is insane. At best, we already proved to you why whatever neutrality they talk about exists in the Gulf. But secondly, it's totally different from what neutrality actually looks like, completely ironic to the case. Number four, a bit of meta, that one complicated, I'll talk later. Let's start number one, inherent need to grow. I think it's important we push from policy. That Malaysia is a developing economy, we have an inherent need to grow, we need to find partners ASAP. This also means it doesn't have to be the biggest one. We say the most strategic one is important. Keywords here. The most strategic one here is the Notice policy, right? Because specifically we tell you a few things. Number one, Japan and Korea we already have a good relationship with, means re-bolstering those relationships can happen better. But number two, that because a symbiosis, a mutual benefit arrangement means both sides of the house to win, we need to provide something to Korea and Japan. And what do they need? I think it's explained within like analysis, i.e. they need manpower, they need labor, and what does Malaysia need? We need technology transfer, we need this like China and Japan industries to come down and make us much more better since we are a manufacturing economy, clear within clear within my speech. Secondly then, on this symbiosis, right, what does this then lead to? I think this symbiosis eventually led to the creation of the security pact. I think Indian response maybe is more less speculative. Doesn't matter, it's still positive, still matter to me. Alright, thirdly, on neutrality, and I think this is where we really take down law, right? Because Cobb's idea of neutrality is insane. They tell you that neutrality means we will trade with everyone. But at the same time, they push the burden to us that, oh, when you look east, you must reject all other trade offers, which is stop trade with everyone else. Firstly, this doesn't make sense. But secondly, that this only applies when trade deals are diametrically opposed. This means if China offers a better deal as opposed to Korea and Japan, you're forced to go against China or any alternative. We'll find with that already considered that anything at the very least, like it's still some form of commitment, which is important, especially since proven the symbiosis benefit that comes out of this. Lastly, on meta, here's the more complicated. Because let's exit this debate, actually judge them, right? Notice that at best, a surplus exists of cost. We prove to you that we can lead to this growth, that this policy provides some mutual benefits. What does POP realistically prove to you? Like, Pop just tells you neutrality is important, choose the best deals. Like, we can also choose the best deals outside of manufacturing. We can also choose the best deals when it comes to exporting chicken and eggs and whatever nonsense that doesn't apply in the Lucas policy. Like, it's not mutually exclusive here. So on the realistic aspect of the debate, Pop looks insane to push around burdens that are importantly to first improve dimensional workforce. This was why it's important that they needed to defend the structure beyond neutrality. So when Kelvin comes out and tells you, it's look-wise, I guess that should have been the case from the start. Insofar as the comparative has to be done by the Gulf, we've given to you why the default is neutrality is an immediately losing case, why the case has to be somewhat of a surplus, you can't compare 1 to 0. Thank you.